This is Alex Bryant. I want to thank you all very much for signing up and registering for our webinar today, which I think is pretty critical as companies are looking at the current environment in the US and in China, and they're looking at the global footprint of where they currently are manufacturing, currently sourcing. They're looking at the current tariff situations. They're looking at trying to get close to their customers. They're looking at the uncertainty out in the space. A lot of companies are now planning and developing strategies which they would execute next year. Hopefully this presentation here will give you some idea of strategies that other companies are applying and how they're implementing them and what success they're having. So here is the agenda. We're going to go through a brief introduction of East West Associates, a brief introduction of the speakers, why are the manufacturers, we're going to be talking about really why manufacturers relocating into China, critical considerations, but we'll move through that pretty quickly. We've got 3 case studies that we thought are quite relevant going into about China and going into Poland, going into other locations, how companies are diversifying their supply chain and manufacturing. And then we're going to get into the Q&A session. And that's really where we want to spend most of our time, right? Because we've got 4 very smart people speaking today, and we want to be able to take their advantage. So really brief introduction on East West. East West, as many of you know, we're 20 years old. We're operating on the ground in 5 locations in China, Southeast Asia, Mexico, and Central Eastern Europe, and here in the US. And the team that we have in all of these locations in China, Southeast Asia, Mexico, Poland, and across the US are individuals who have all had P&L responsibilities for running companies on the ground in their markets. They've all come from different functional skill sets, but they all have P&L responsibilities for running their business and operating a company on the ground in one of these markets. So they had to, during their time period, they had to have their responsibilities, P&L responsibilities. They had to have strategy development, strategy responsibilities, and implementation. So the East-West, having that kind of talent, East-West really does 4 things for our client. 1 is global manufacturing supply chain footprint, and you can see what's that covered. That's everything from global site selection to new facilities, right, and identifying the right countries and the right regions and the right piece of land. It's also about closing manufacturing plants, relocating manufacturing plants. It's a lot about looking at the global supply chain footprint, where they're currently supplying and where they're currently manufacturing, and trying to, based on the new dynamics in the current economic situation, getting them to closer to their customer base and taking advantage of opportunities to consolidate or improve their manufacturing footprint. So that's one of the services we provide. Second service is operational commercial performance. That's a lot around our M&A due diligence work and around corporate restructuring and turnaround work on the ground in these various markets, including China. Third area is supply chain. We do all aspects of supply chain, whether it's qualifying suppliers, setting up suppliers, supplier transition, supplier investigations, make versus buy. We've been operating on supply chain for a long time, and it's one of our core practice areas. And the 4th area is human resources and risk management. And that's primarily where we are going in and identifying, qualifying new executives for our clients in these markets. Their senior level positions, a new country manager in China, operations manager. And we also there will do our interim general management, where we are oftentimes asked by a company to come in and run an operation for a period of months while we find a replacement for them. So those are kind of 4 core areas. It's all about how to run a business a lot more effectively in a pretty dynamic, changing market. And we are not the lawyers, we are not the accountants, we are the strategic and executioners. All right, so here's where the 5 places we talked about: the US, Mexico, Southeast Asia, China, Central Eastern Europe. This is a list of our clients, but if you want to go on our website, you can see a much longer list of the client base. Introduction to speakers we have. I'm going to turn it over now first to Dan McLeod. Dan, if you would introduce yourself, and Mark, if you would take over from Dan.
Okay, thanks, Alex. Yep, Dan McLeod. I've been working with Alex at East West for about 8 years now. Prior to working with East West, I was in several operations management and engineering management positions, both in the U.S. and in Asia. I spent 21 years working in Asia, developing organizations, building factories, managing capital expansion plans in China and Southeast Asia. Much of the work I've been doing with East West, pivots off that into, site selection, footprint analysis, supply chain transition, supplier identification, and the like. Mark?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Dan. So yeah, I was like Dan, living in Asia from 1990 to 2014. So 5 years in Thailand as the vice president for Trane Air Conditioning in Indochina. So had response for Thailand, Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos. Moved up in Shanghai and was there for roughly 19 years as the president of Briggs & Stratton. 5 manufacturing locations, design centers, all that sort of stuff. So, and had responsibility from China and then of course from Korea all the way down to Indonesia and joint ventures in all those countries and distribution. So pretty good footprint and background in Asia. Joined up with Alex in 2014, so I'm on about 11 years, and my focus primarily is Southeast Asia, and specifically I spend a lot of time in Thailand and Vietnam supporting our clients. So Darius, over to you, bud.
Yeah, hello everyone, my name is Dariusz Szpierach. I bring over 20 years of experience in management consulting with a strong focus on procurement, strategic sourcing, operations, and supply chain transformation. I also come from an engineering background, which allows me to work effectively within the manufacturing environment. For the last 5+ years, I've been working with East West Associates, supporting international clients in building resilient supply chains and then identifying competitive suppliers across Central and Eastern Europe. Earlier in my career, I worked as an interim manager or independent consultant and collaborated with big 4 firms on procurement transformation, operating model design, and strategic sourcing projects for global manufacturing organizations. Thank you. Lee?
Thank you, Darius. My name is Li Xiao, based in Shanghai, China. I actually grew up in China and also has all my career in China, most of it. Have 20 years experience working with multinational companies, doing mostly transformation and turnaround projects. More specifically, I've worked also with interim general manager projects for 6 companies in the last 7 years, mostly for private equity firms and also mid-sized multinationals. And because of the geopolitical issues, our focus shift a little bit more to supply chain, which is our main topic today as well. I'm currently also the Shanghai chapter co-leader for North America in ATTA, which stands for Asia Transformation and Turnaround Association. Yeah, that's about it. Happy to start the webinar.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Luciano. So you met with the team, our global team, who'll be answering these questions today. When we're talking about why manufacturers relocating out of China, what are some of the critical considerations? I think everyone on the slide, we don't need to spend much time on this. Everyone already knows a lot of this is being driven by the tariffs, driven by labor rates, it's driven by a lot of different factors. What we have done is we did a survey recently of 150 manufacturers, excuse me, who were operating or had supply chain in China. And we wanted to determine where they were leaving. If they were leaving China, where are they going? Right? If you've got customers on the ground in China, a lot of companies aren't leaving, but for those who had a lot of export from their China operation or who was sourcing in China and wanted to identify all the suppliers, here's where they were going. The largest obviously was going from China into Southeast Asia, Thailand, Vietnam, Philippines, etc. The second highest was going into Mexico. And then from Mexico, you went into the US, bringing some nearshoring back. One of our case studies is on nearshoring. Then you had other locations, and then you had Central Eastern Europe, right? So this is where they were going for new supply chain alternatives, new manufacturing locations. So here we're going to hit some case studies. This first case study is a North American footprint analysis. I'll turn it over to Dan McLeod and let Dan drive forward with this one.
Okay, well, in this case study, we're talking about an Illinois-based manufacturer of larger consumer products. And we had done some work for them a few years back, helping them expand their footprint into Central Europe, into Poland. And as they continue to move ahead, that was a very successful move for them. And as they continue to evaluate their current footprint, what they were faced with was the largest factory was declining in output. It was the age of it and the lack of maintenance that was causing declining output at the same time that costs were increasing and demand was increasing. And some of the costs also manifested itself in difficulty finding and retaining employees. So we were engaged to evaluate options for them, options for reconfiguring their North American footprint. This included looking at construction of a new factory and distribution center in the Southeast United States, replacing their existing operation. And then secondly, partnering with an established manufacturer in an adjacent field to produce the product and ship it on their behalf from an existing operation that had many of the same manufacturing capabilities. And then thirdly, to establish their own factory and in Mexico and distribute from a center on the US side of the border. In this case, it would be sourced primarily from a supply chain in Mexico and Asia, as with the intent to eventually relocate much of their North American supply chain from the Midwest to Mexico. Next slide, Alex.
There you go.
Oh, there we go. So as far as the three options we looked at, in the Southeast US, we evaluated 10 states, talked to economic development organizations in all of them, modeled labor costs, logistics, connectivity through, to their various established distribution centers and established customer base, and utility cost availability. And also we looked at various incentives available. And there's a wide range of that across the geography there. And again, and locally, very locally, we collected information on wages, property costs, and available properties to model investment there. In Mexico, we were successful identifying potential partners. We had two of them that were quite interested, and that at first glance had the interest, capability, and fit from a manufacturing technology standpoint. We also looked at the same time developing supply chain there to support that, and that would be, we expected that was going to take a minimum of 3 years to complete that. So that would be a significant undertaking as well, both not just relocation of their manufacturing, but their supply chain, supplier base as well. Next slide, Alex.
Right. There we go.
All right. So So finally, on the third option to set up a new factory in Mexico, we evaluated the country and looked for 5 up-and-coming regions that had seen some growth and were still considered viable for, and had some growth opportunities left for the manufacturing center. Developed budgetary costs for building and staffing and operating those facilities, particularly around utility costs, which this plant was a large consumer of natural gas in particular. So that again had put some constraints on where we could possibly locate in the country. Also, there was a substantial amount of specialty proprietary design equipment that they were operating. Some of it was beyond their useful life, but there was a significant amount of it that would be tagged for relocation. We developed estimates to dismantle and move that equipment, and in addition, developed a cost estimate for setting up and running a distribution center in Texas, again incorporating logistics costs to their major marketing centers in the U.S. So the conclusion was that any advantages Mexico have over the U.S. was really limited to labor savings and tariff avoidance. And then the U.S. is generally other costs tend to be lower. Building costs, utility costs, freight costs certainly are lower. And so for this, it was really, there was not a significant driver one way or the other at this point. What they did decide to do was to pursue development of a Mexican-based supply chain, where we move more and more of their supplier base to Mexico. There did seem to be an opportunity for that, and the plan was to revisit the topic, revisit the expansion strategy again, pending the success of their sourcing initiatives. So that finishes. Mark, you want to take over on contract manufacturing in Poland?
Yeah, be glad to, Dan. So this was a client that is in their industry, that the number one in the United States and perhaps even the world. They produced ground handling equipment at airports. Tuggers, that push the planes back, tractors that move luggage around. Stuff that you see all the time when you're flying at the airports. Really a well-known company in that industry. They had several factories in the States that supplied the States, and then they had one also in Spain, and that had been set up. That was a wholly owned, had been set up, I think 18, 20 years ago. And a couple of things had changed. Over the years now, the market for new airports has really moved to Central and Eastern Europe, based on the population, the population moving and the growth in that area. And two, they were looking at a way to go a little bit more asset light. In other words, they really didn't want to have those assets tied up in Spain. So they wanted to reallocate those to other areas. So they were looking at a contract manufacturing model. So where could they go in Central and Eastern Europe to find someone who might either be in the industry or adjacent to the industry, and maybe someone that's off-road equipment, farm agricultural tractors, that kind of stuff. Could they find someone that they could then teach them the business and put them into the business of airport transportation equipment, which is maybe just one step away from what they were presently doing. So I'll turn it over to Darius. He then picked up the project and then carried it on forward from there.
So I think the biggest challenge was that exact type of supplier they needed simply didn't exist in the market in Central and Eastern Europe. So that meant that we had to search for companies with similar production capabilities rather than identical products experience. So what was our approach? Our approach was we began with building a detailed capability criteria matrix covering manufacturing process, machinery fit, engineering capability, quality systems, and ramp-up potential. And using this matrix, we screened the Polish market, Polish manufacturers, mapping them against the required capability set. Then we started to compare, and the strongest candidates, actually there were 3 strongest candidates, were located in eastern Poland, where there is a tradition of manufacturing airplanes, helicopters, heavy machinery, welded structures, and where the rates, labor rates, are still on the mid-level or lower level, while they have easy access to European routes. So we shortlisted, as I mentioned, 3 manufacturers and started to organize visits both to their Polish factories and the client plant in Spain. Obviously with the objective to validate engineering capability, review the production processes, analyze cost drivers, and verify capacity for long-term cooperation. And the selected manufacturer was an off-road vehicles manufacturer, with whom we established a transfer, including sub-suppliers and production processes. And we also prepared a list of terms describing the duties and the responsibilities split, and this as a package was then handed over to the client. Thank you.
And we had a question come in, Darius, on this. It was asking about, you talked here about finding a supplier that it was not directly on, but it was similarly situated type of industry sector. Do you find that a lot in when you're doing some automotive or the transportation kind of products looking in Eastern Europe? I mean, because there's a strong history there of making automotive and transportation, planes, helicopter kind of equipment. Do you find that there's generally, if you don't have a company that is perfect supplier, there are plenty of companies that are similarly situated?
Yes, because actually we were going through a cluster or even 2-3 clusters of companies that are gathered in the, let's say, aircraft and aerospace industry, also roads vehicles, and also semi-trailers. So therefore it wasn't really difficult. They are all kind of located close one to another, and so we could also visit them in an easier way. So yeah, I mean, it wasn't a challenge. It was, I would say, just a question of how we manage the matrix of capabilities and how we scan this market. But it's obviously that's the point, that not always you have a supplier who has exactly the same product as you need. So sometimes you need to look basically at the capabilities of production and engineering capabilities. Yes.
Understood. All right, then I think we had one other case study, Dan. I think you're going to look at this as the supply chain transition to Mexico.
Yes, thanks, Alex. This was a client of ours that were based in Georgia. They had a few manufacturing sites in the Southeast United States, and historically, this company focused on the high-end market, very high, tall buildings, specialized, almost custom applications. When they looked at their business a few years ago, they decided that they thought in North America there could be an opportunity in more of a mid-level market where buildings weren't quite as tall and the conditions weren't as severe. So they've decided to launch a new product line for there, but unfortunately they were constrained on capacity, and so they wanted to evaluate going outside for contract manufacturing. So we were engaged to identify potential contractors for them, look at some key suppliers in addition to the assembly contractors, and then facilitate, support them through the supplier setup and the transition. Next slide, Alex.
Yes.
So we did the market survey and our own experience, our folks' own experience working out of the Monterey area, identified a handful of electrical mechanical assembly contractors that we thought could be a fit. We developed the appropriate RFQ package and worked through the clarification of suppliers until we came up with the preferred route. We also looked at sheet metal cabinets and wire harnesses and local fastener design, fastener distribution centers to bring additional materials in addition to just the labor that was involved in the box build. And also as part of that, looked at where the details of where the components were coming from, particularly to maintain the country of origin status as Mexico, rather than having too much China content, particularly. Okay, Alex.
Right. All right. Here
So
the
as it-
results.
Yeah, as it turned out, the client accepted our recommendation on which supplier, which contract you use. We got through the PPAP processes and produced prototypes, and currently they've completed the scale up for one of the 3 products we brought there. So the remaining 2 are going through scale up and qualification process. This is a fairly recent project that we started, and what we're seeing is about 11 to 16% cost savings on the product, depending which of the 3 of the main product lines we were talking about. Okay.
And that plant is perfectly set for Mexico on that project. All right, so here is on some of the QA discussions. So we're going to be moving through these. We're going to be looking at questions around the China market, around supply chain, around manufacturing. So we'll start off, I think, with these questions. Again, if anyone has questions they would like to ask, if you look at the on the right-hand side, you'll see your control panel, and you'll see questions. Please fill in the question. It'll come right to us, and we can answer it. We generally we're able to get to all questions during the time. However, if we run late, we will follow up with your question either verbally or in a written email within 48 hours of this webinar. But you can access them by putting the questions into your control panel. All right, so the first question we had when we were having companies register, someone sent a question around talking around the signs of the business climate. Are they improving in China now? And what about also companies who are either moving west to reduce they're staying in China, but they're moving west to reduce their manufacturing costs, or in some cases they're in operations now where they have to relocate because the current facility is got urban sprawl, or people are having to move because they are being charged an awful lot of rent and they can't afford it. Li Xiao, I think you're based there in Shanghai. Why don't you take that first one if you would?
Sure, thank you, Alex. As everybody is aware, that China and US and with other European countries as well, we have some geopolitical issues, and the tariff has been really impact a lot of different businesses. But most recently, presidents from both China and US met in Korea, and there are many positive agreements reached, which give business companies and media even a lot of confidence that both countries are trying to negotiate even more towards a positive way in 2026. There's a chance that President Trump may visit China in April. So that kind of signal is paving the way for a better business climate overall between the 2 countries and around the globe. In terms of the West initiative, about 10 to 15 years ago, China started that mainly because of the cost. But however, with these years of accumulated knowledge and also experts driving towards the West, we found actually through our very recent, actually current project, one of our clients actually relocating their machining facilities or businesses to the West. When we did the feasibility study or initial research, we find the cost is one factor driving this initiative. But other than that, the experts and also the engineering capability plus logistics, all these matters actually do prove going West is actually safe and sound possibility for industries matching, especially for automotive related and also electronics related industries.
Good. Do you see, Lixiao, do you see the business climate as far as improving? Is it going to be more along? Is it probably a little early to tell what's going to be like the next until we get some clarification on what the Chinese government and the U.S. government is going to resolve as far as tariffs?
Sure, there are signs, but there are definitely a lot of speculations because there's still not very definite agreements on tariff yet. So the tariffs going to the US from China is still over 50% for most of the products. It's still early to say that it will come down as 5 years ago.
Yeah, and I know you all are currently working on a project now to move someone out of their current location to another location. And you all have successfully done that. It hadn't been that difficult to find other, at least in that area where they are, other sites that are desirous of welcoming another company into that park, into their park.
Yeah.
Okay. So on the second question, Mark, I want to turn it to you about when you're talking to these executives, right, about diversifying supply chain and manufacturing. We're talking to them weekly. What are the key issues these executives are facing when they're looking to diversify supply chain manufacturing for their own companies?
Yeah, sure. And it's a variety of things. We talk to a lot of people, and you talk to them, kind of, why did you go to China to begin with? Well, some went there for a domestic market, right? Okay. Some went there for, low cost supply. Some went there to set up a regional headquarters in China to handle all of Asia. So a variety of reasons, and then many of those reasons have subsequently changed. Maybe your cost points aren't where you want it to be. Maybe your end markets have moved. So so what we always tell people is, okay, the things that took you there to begin with, the drivers, should be the same kind of thought process you have when you look at other places. Maybe number one, where are you going there for the domestic market? Okay, then fine. Or are you going there to an area, but is your market, your consumption, maybe back in the States? Okay, then you may want to rethink. Do you want to be in Asia anymore? Or should you be in Mexico or South America or even Southeast United States? Early on, as your market Western Europe, and you could have supplied it easily 20, 30 years ago because the labor costs were so inexpensive that freight didn't matter. You could ship stuff from China to Western Europe, and even pay the freight and still be ahead of the game because your costs were so low. So we're going to talk a little bit later on about specific metrics that you look at, but we always tell everyone to kind of think back why you went to China to begin with, and then decide what of those criterias, kind of say, okay, now those changed. Where would you think about areas now that that maybe you want to look at, and then we can certainly help you. And a lot of it is really based on domestic consumption. If you're gonna continue to supply clients in China, then you need to be in China. But if a lot of your product is or components is leaving, then you need to start going back through that whole process of, what's some of the drivers, and then we can help you then identify countries and then identify a specific metrics that will support you. So that's a little bit of our 20,000 foot story when advice when we're talking to clients.
Yeah, and I know, Mark, you just finished a project where you had a client who wanted to stop their China operation, and they were an industrial sewing fabrication business, and they wanted to close their China operation, but they needed to identify a third-party contractor, right? And they needed to figure out where that third-party contractor, need to find them, need to qualify them, right? And so can you, looking at question 3 here, we're talking about, how do companies identify the right suppliers? How did y'all go about doing that for that client? I mean,
So this one was very similar to the one Darius just talked about in Poland. This was a client that was in China, and again, in their industry, very dominant, as in, extremely dominant and number one or number two, but they had a wholly owned facility. And so much of their product was not staying in there. Their finished goods was not staying in China. It was going to Southeast Asia, even Australia, New Zealand, and then of course back to the States. They also were very interested in, again, trying to free up assets, and looking at a third-party contract manufacturing model. And so we looked at 3 countries. We looked at Mexico, we looked at Thailand, we looked at Vietnam, and to see, well, who out there. And then first thing you look for is, can you find someone exactly in your industry? But now you got to be careful, because that could be a competitor. Or do you find someone that's one adjacent away, like Darius did in Poland with the off-road guys, that could then eventually make, equipment for the airport transportation. So in this case, we surveyed Mexico really close, and there just wasn't anyone there that was really suited for these. These were large, expensive, $30,000-$40,000 commercial sewing machines. And in Thailand, there was a decent component base, but really no one that was really in the business. And then now in Vietnam, just so happens, there was a large manufacturer who made small machines, the ones you see in your homes, the $500 to $1,000. And they were looking to add to their line, meaning the big stuff. So, and then we looked at other ones in Vietnam, because there was 4 or 5 guys in Vietnam, and then eventually we chose the one that was made small machines. Our product line, our client's product line, was complementary and didn't pose a threat then as a competitor, and they were able then to unload their assets, sell their assets in China, and go to a contract manufacturing model, which was all based on more on variable costs than on assets. So it was a very successful project. I think that's what you were referring to, right?
Yeah, I mean, because it goes into like question 3. I mean, we've had clients come to us in different industry sectors, like that was a sewing one. Plenty of companies that come to us like the electronic sector. How are they supposed to figure out what region they should be going to, whether in the electronic sector, focus on Southeast Asia, Mexico, Poland? I know in your example, Mark, the one you just used, we knew enough to go ahead and figure out where in Southeast Asia to look.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. So yeah, we know the market, the industry. Most of us have all, if we haven't lived there for a long time, we've traveled there for a long time. Then we have people on the ground. I mean, certainly people on the ground are employees or partners. So yeah, we're maybe getting ahead of ourselves a little bit, but you look at things. If you're going to actually, if you're looking at a third-party contract manufacturer, well, then you're going to rely on him. You have to work closely with him with have detailed drawings and good oversight, that sort of thing. But he's already there. He's already got his business licenses established. He's already got his tax advantages already established with the government. He's, you know, he already knows where he already has component suppliers and raw materials. So, you know, so when you find a third-party contract manufacturer, if you can find the right one, it can make your life a lot simpler versus going in and doing a greenfield. And we do a lot of greenfields too, because sometimes your product is so specific or your IP is you're so concerned that you want to control that and do a greenfield. And then of course you get into the whole 8, 10, 12 metrics that you look at and then compare and contrast countries.
Right. I want to pull up, kind of teeing off that, go to question number 5 here. Talk about some of the unique challenges for companies who are identifying and transitioning to suppliers in Mexico, Southeast Asia, Central Europe. And then within those regions, what are the kind of the 2 or 3 core dominant sectors that are in them, and where has a good supply chain? Do these companies have a good supply chain base? So Dan, starting off with you, if we're looking at Mexico, right? What would you, when we're looking at Mexico, you just did an example of for that elevator company, what we did for them in Mexico. But if you're looking, if your market is the U.S., or you're looking at the Mexican third-party contract manufacturer, Mexican suppliers, what are the kind of industry sectors you're looking for in Mexico that are most dominant there? And what are some of the challenges of working with those Mexican suppliers? Because we've been doing it for a while, and they are different kind of suppliers than say Chinese suppliers.
Yeah, some of the sectors that are very successful, well established, and that people are moving into are medical devices, certainly, electronic manufacturing, box building really stays there. The automotive continues to thrive. Aerospace is growing substantially, and then more historical, traditional industries around industrial components, castings, machining work. Those are still solid opportunities in Mexico. The challenge is that, one of the challenges that many companies come from, if they've been doing work in China for a number of years, is having complete and up-to-date design information that you can use to work with and for potentially new suppliers. The supplier base, particularly in Mexico, is adamant about complete specifications. They tend not to provide a lot of engineering support as part of the package with potential clients. And that's a bit of a change than what many companies have experienced in China, where it's a manufacturer, whether it's for a unique product or somebody that's sort of building a commodity and working with multiple downstream manufacturers, not downstream sellers. They're willing to spend a good deal of effort and development effort in the design up front. That's a little different than what you'd see in other parts of the world.
That's it. Mark, could you kind of compare and contrast that for Southeast Asia?
Well, yeah, I mean, Southeast Asia is, I mean, it's, I'll use Thailand as an example, but everyone that's in China was in Thailand before that, so all your auto industry is extremely strong in Thailand. Your HVAC industry is extremely strong. Your appliances, your white goods, your small consumer electronic are extremely strong. The Japanese have been in there with electronics for 40, 50 years, Sanyo, Toshiba, Hitachi, etc. A lot of those they were all manufacturing and doing quite well in the 80s and 90s, and then China really got aggressive on labor rates and opened up, and so a lot of them, of course, went to China. It doesn't mean that they left Thailand. They were still there. So now when it comes to some people that are maybe thinking they want to leave China, with a lot of these top companies from Japanese, Korean, American, German, et cetera, French, they're there, and they're just adding capacity now and actually gaining market share from some share they lost from Thailand to China 25, 30 years ago. So yeah, there's the industrial manufacturing base, and then of course Vietnam is not to that stage yet, of course, but more of the labor intensive stuff that maybe Thailand has decided it's really not for them. And Vietnam is beginning to do a lot of that. So yeah, these guys down there, we always tell everybody that, you know, if you've been in business, say 25 years, and now you're in senior leadership positions, some of our clients, all they know, and when it comes to Asia, is China. They don't realize that before China, you know, there was a very robust manufacturing base out there in Thailand and Vietnam, certainly the Philippines, Taiwan, you know, without question. So there's a lot of opportunities.
Interesting. That's 100% true. Darius, is there anything you want to dress up for Poland, for Central Eastern Europe, as far as some of the unique challenges of transitioning to suppliers in Poland, and what are kind of the dominant sectors in the Polish Eastern European market?
Yeah, okay. At first, what is worth noted is that, you know, the region in Poland and the region has changed. It's no longer a cheap region or low-cost region. It's, I would say, now a value-driven region, and therefore also the variety of products that you can source from here are a little bit different than they were 20, 30 years ago. So basically, the region, the Central and Eastern Europe, is strong in all types of metalworking, machining, precision CNC, all those serving automotive and aerospace industry as a tier 1, tier 2 suppliers. And that would include Poland, Czechia, Slovakia, Hungary, Romania. But also electronics still strong in this region, plastics, technical textiles of different type. Again, coming back to the metal, I would say all type of industry machinery, and those kinds of industries. As for the challenges, I would say, I mean, coming along with it. First of all, there is a good pool of engineers, but they are quickly being captured by companies here. So the rates are growing. That would be challenging. The other challenging factor is that sometimes you need a little bit more time to do the transition as you would do in Asia, as probably you need more discussions before you are tied up, more discussions with the engineers, and you need to be direct. You need to have more meetings, more workshops before you are tied up. I mean, in Asia, I think Asia style is tied up first and then discuss, while here it's discussion, and then we know what to do with, then we can cooperate together. And you have to be direct. If people sense there is a hidden agenda, then they may be closed, and you may not be able to go on further. The issue could be also the transparency of costs and in the entire supply chain or in the process. I mean, obviously it depends from the industry, but obviously automotive is a fully open book industry, but the other industries, they have certain rules, and Polish companies or companies from this region are very stiff about that. I remember working with a foundries in Poland where we are looking for cast iron products for one client from the US, where obviously in this kind of products the material cost must be shown separately from the other costs, because it may vary, and therefore you need to adjust the price at the end. But obviously the other important factor is energy and labor, and we wanted to discuss this, but this wasn't really revealed by the suppliers. So as I said, they are stiff. So those are, I would say, main challenges. But to summarize, I would say value value-driven products with where I would say mid or high-level engineering is required, is the suitable product for this region. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, you're doing a lot of work right now with some other clients. Looking at both. What on question 4, before we jump forward to the next slide, we got a couple questions here. Question here about number 4, about optimizing China suppliers in ASEAN. And Li Xiao, I was going to turn that over to you and ask if you would just kind of explain, discuss that a little bit about how to optimize your suppliers in ASEAN. You may have a Chinese supplier that moved to Vietnam or moved to Thailand.
Right. Actually, there was a very obvious trend that many Chinese suppliers are moving towards Southeast Asia or ASEAN. They are mostly looking at similar standards and similar protocols. However, there are some regulations, local regulations they need to follow, and also to study the environmental situation over there. So that's one thing Chinese suppliers is pretty much looking at. The other thing is tariff, right? Even though Southeast Asia countries, when they export to US, it has a less tariff rate, but still it's worth monitoring to see what the composition, and do they do only assembly over there, or they actually manufacture the raw material from other markets too.
Right. Right.
Yeah. Any other inputs from you guys?
Well, I mean, I think you made a good point about many small to medium-sized Chinese suppliers are stepping up plans to move into ASEAN, and that's a route that Western companies are working with. They're encouraging it. It comes up, well, particularly if it's a U.S. company, it comes up in conversation with many of these suppliers, and they're looking at ways to collaborate with you. But depending where you go geographically, if you're in the electronics industry, moved into the Hanoi region primarily because they can maintain access routes and supply lines from southern China by truck deliveries where it's 8 or 10 hours away. So yeah, looking at logistics routes to optimize those within ASEAN, and then if you're a country within the ASEAN group, you trade freely in between. And if you're looking at your local content and trying to optimize local content, very often if a material is produced in another ASEAN country, it qualifies as locally. So that helps get you over some of the hurdles.
Another thing, you have to be very careful if you're looking at Chinese suppliers that you've been working with that then have or are moving to, say, Vietnam or Thailand. The U.S. government is, particularly Vietnam, has been watching very closely to make sure it is substantially transformed, and that's been an issue. And the U.S. government and the customs has been scrutinizing that, and Vietnam has been it's been slapped several times, and some factories have been closed. When the old joke was years ago, and the Chinese motorcycle guys were shipping motorcycles to Vietnam and then putting the handlebars on down there. So
right.
You'd be very careful. Now, I think the Chinese manufacturers have learned their lessons a lot based on and so I'm not trying to be a Pollyanna and scare people, because I think the lessons have been well learned, but it's something you need to be very, very sure of. So, because you don't want to have something come back into the United States and you think it's going to be a Vietnam produced product with all the regulations, with the duty structure between Vietnam and the United States at 19%, and it gets classified because you didn't substantially transform it, and you don't have local content. you end up paying the Chinese 50%. So those are things you need to really be careful of.
That's a good point that we've been told by customs, right? They're going to really taking a hard look at some of those countries like Vietnam. So
Oh, they
very
have. Yeah.
fair point.
If we had Jacob on the phone right now, our guys in Ho Chi Minh City, he would cite there's the factory 3 months ago that was all their inventory was totally locked up and still locked up because it doesn't meet or conform with USA customs and local content.
Yeah, so here, so the next question here kind of gears toward companies who are relocating manufacturing and to a region outside of where they currently are. So I'd like to start with kind of question 2 here, and maybe Mark, you could start off with us talk about Thailand, and then take the Philippines, and what kind of incentives you're seeing in these different countries.
Yeah, so for those of you that were around when you went to China, 20, who's, 10, 15, 20 years ago, quite often your industrial parks or even or by province and even down to the industrial park level would offer incentives on tax, local tax, support on training, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And when in the early years when China was really trying to attract business, it was pretty smooth, frankly. Then as the years went by, and then sometimes those incentives went away because they didn't need it quite as much. So now you go down to say Thailand and Vietnam, which we were pretty familiar with. They have 2 different approaches to it. So Thailand takes it from a national level, and if you happen to have a product or a process or manufacturing that can receive Thailand BOI or Thailand Board of Investment, and then qualify for one of their incentive levels, they go from A1 to C3, where you might, an A2 or A3 may be 5 to 10 years of no corporate income tax at all, and another 5 years at 50% of corporate of relief of total relief of corporate income tax. So that gets established right away at the national level. The Board of Investments office reports directly to the Prime Minister's office. So that's how they're pretty serious. Vietnam is a little bit more like China. Similar philosophy. It's more regional. If you have to negotiate sometimes by province, or even, as I said many times, by industrial zone or industrial state, and depending what you have, can be very easy, meaning they really want what you do, and it's fine. If you're not quite as attractive, then it can become a little bit more difficult. So those are kind of the approaches. As I said, Thailand is very aggressive because they really want to attract business back because they have the manufacturing base. They just want to see if they can increase capacity.
All right, and Dan, Dan, if you're seeing similar stuff in the Philippines, I assume, and I know you.
Yeah, the setup, Board of Investment setup, and is very similar to what you see in Thailand. Pretty well prescribed categorization of different industries, technology sectors that they're trying to incentivize, and so consequently the incentives and primarily in the result of tax-free operation or reduced income tax. Those are pretty consistently applied across, and you get a pretty good idea from reading the criteria what you could qualify for. Likewise, there's another organization, industrial zones that are export-oriented industrial zones that work hand in hand with the Board of Investment. So if you're in the Philippines, for electronics manufacturing, for example, or even to run shared service centers, there are advantages being within these export-oriented zones also. Yeah.
Okay. All right, and then finally, Mark, I think on the on question number 4 there about in-country factors, right?
Mm-hmm.
You compare. Can you talk a little bit about that, if you would? What in-country factors you looked into when you're relocating?
So yeah, you're talking about metrics. So yeah, what everyone they're not what everyone kind of looks at, 8 or 10 real metrics. People right away, first thing they always want to go to labor. Okay, so it's not only labor cost, it's labor availability, it's labor skill set. Do you have, what's the cost for the labor? What's the availability of the labor? What's the skill set of the labor? Really important. Your supply base. Do you have raw materials and components available, or do you have to import them? And then that's, okay. The country you're going to, do they have a well-established free trade agreements? So you build your product there, and they have free trade agreements with 15, 20 different countries, allows you for your exports. Really pretty important. Government support, as we just talked about, whether it's a national or at the local level, is the local government, do they want you there? Are they going to incentivize you to come there? Are they going to really support you, help you with your imports, help you with all that sort of stuff? Is there a good domestic market? That's also really critical. Can you work on your domestic market and then as you grow your export market based on that? Transparency. Is everything transparent? Is it open, or is it oblique? Opaque, I should say. You have those things you want to look at. Corruption index, obviously, you take a look at all those. So what we do, and those aren't unique, everyone kind of knows those. You have to then compare and contrast those. If you're looking at 3-4 countries, you put together the metrics, you put together the rating scale, you weight things that are more important and less important, and then you start up. Then statistically, you can come up with at least a guidepost that says, yeah, these guys look pretty good for these particular reasons. So that's our approach, and it's really, I think, worked out quite well.
What I would add, if I may, what I would add, one point to that is probably regulatory framework. That would be also an important factor to consider. For instance, in Poland, we are fully aligned with the European Union, which means that the laws and labor law and other regulations are maybe a little bit more rigid and less flexible. But on the other hand, if you need an IP protection or good ESG, then it's the right place to go. You can easily deal with that issues.
Right. And would you have, and I guess lastly, before we hop off, I think, Lixiao, I want to ask you about China itself, right? And we know that people are closing operations in China, and we know the number of them are in China. They want to stay in China, but they're relocating their operations, getting them outside of Shanghai. They may have, when they put it in years ago, it was pretty agricultural, rural area, and now maybe surrounded by shopping centers, residential neighborhoods. Can you talk a little bit about the experience, the challenge of closing facilities? Because we've done a number of them, we do a number of them. Talk a little bit about the challenge of that.
Yes, as China is getting more affluent, and people are getting more social stability. So China is putting more insurance on the labor force. That's why the severance or the termination issue is becoming more and more obvious. So that's becomes number one topic when a company decided to close down the facility in China. And other than that, tax liability may be another very obvious issue to look at. And other than that, there will be some emotions or people's feelings about this, or even supply chain and customer base, how they treat the closure of the business. Would that affect other global business? That's something that we will always encourage our client to look into. In terms of relocation, as Mark has mentioned earlier, it depends on how the client is looking at their future markets. Are they still try to satisfy the local Chinese market, or are they primarily trying to look at elsewhere, let's say homeland in US or North America or European or Southeast Asian markets? So if they have identified that, and that's something to start with. If they do want to look at Chinese market still, inland is definitely a possible alternative. As we mentioned earlier, western part of China is getting more mature with much lower cost base, but good talent pool as well as infrastructure is well established. Yeah, so it's up to the strategic direction plus the feasibility study, I would say.
That's right. That's right. And we know that even we look at Suzhou and plenty of other good business parks and the rate of increase they're seeing in those parks. In some cases, it makes sense to move. In some cases, it doesn't, but that's got to be put into the analysis. But it's
Sure.
certainly, one thing about closure is that it's happening in China and the employees are very knowledgeable about what they are worth and what they're due, legally due. So
For
that
sure.
has changed dramatically. All right,
Yep.
well, look, I know we've gone a little over here, so I want to thank everyone for taking the time to stay on, and we want to get all the questions answered. But everyone here will be given is going to be given a follow-up survey. If you please go ahead and fill the survey out, and we'll be providing you a copy of the deck presentation as well as a recording on our website. So with that, now concludes this current webinar. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.